Thanks for joining us here at The Research Her, the show working to improve the health disparities for women of color, one topic at a time. And I am Alicia. I'm here learning and growing with you as we research our way to wellness. So I'm about to give y'all a real quick intro to our great sis because I want you to jump into the sauce, which is this episode. So real quick, we will be talking with the great queen, with whom has blessed us with her presence, Rukia Henry. Rukia is a cellular and molecular pharmacology Ph.D. student at Rutgers University, where her research focuses on cancer biology. She is also the creator of Life with Rukia brand. She grew up in Guyana, and she is just showcasing the amazing world of science and her pursuit of a Ph.D. And she also uses her blog to inspire those who want to be a scientist. So yes, let's get into this conversation with our sis. So excited to have you here on the podcast, Rukia.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump into it. I like to start off with icebreaker questions. So the first one is, what is the last song or podcast that you listened to?
So right before you called, I was actually playing this song. Well, I have my little reggae playlist, and the last song on the playlist that I listened to was Life by Christopher Martin. I don't know if you know it, but it's a really good song.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you like about that song?
The song basically says the most expensive thing is life. Like, you can buy anything else, but you literally cannot buy life.
What do you wish were healthy for you?
I actually wish dairy. So like ice cream and milk, because I'm lactose intolerant to the point where if I do eat that, I get breakouts. Like I get pimples on my face, on my back. It's highly inflammatory to me. And sometimes I would break the rule and still eat it and suffer with a ton of pimples. And I'm like, well, but I wish that I was healthy, that I could eat to my free will as much as I want to.
What's your favorite dairy?
Ooh, it would probably be Ben & Jerry's cookie dough ice cream.
If you could break the law one time, what would you do?
Wow, that is... See, I'm a very good law-abiding citizen, so I don't know. But I will say, so do you watch Game of Thrones? Have you watched it?
I mean, to those weirdos who don't watch Game of Thrones.
Okay, because there are people who don't. So you know how Arya had her list of people who crossed her? Mm-hmm. I feel like I have my own list, and I wish I could take some people out. Not take them out as in like take their life, but maybe just like humble them a little.
Humble them.
Know?
You want something to happen so that they get a little humble.
Yes, they need to be humbled. So that's what I would do.
Okay, nice. So we're all ice broken. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. Okay, let's just keep it moving.
We are flowing in the water. The ice is melted.
The ice is melted. There we go. Did baby Rukia know that she would pursue a PhD in cellular and molecular pharmacology?
Man, what did baby Rukia even know? I'll say this. I have a horrible short-term memory. Things that I did like yesterday or last week, or things that I said, I don't remember. But I remember things from since I was a baby. Like, I was telling my dad this week that I remember being potty trained, literally. Because I remember my mom telling me, like, when I would go to bed, she would be like, if you need to go to the potty at night, don't call and wake me up. Call your dad and wake him up. And so what baby Rukia wanted to do was, as I started to grow older, I was so obsessed with like Nancy Drew stuff. I wanted to become a detective. Isn't that funny? Mm-hmm. I wanted to be like a detective, like figuring out like crime stuff. And that was literally my first aspiration.
Oh, cool. That is really cool. Like,
yeah,
that's what you wanted to do.
And yeah, and I would literally write books. Like, I was an author, girl. I have so many books I would just sit and write. And it's weird because maybe at some point while I was younger too, I thought I would be an author. But now I hate writing. It's the weirdest thing. Ask me about how my thesis proposal is going, girl. It's a mess.
Look, I'm not about to stress you out. I did not bring you on this podcast to stress you out. No, I will not.
But definitely not doing a PhD in pharmacology.
Yeah,
No.
I love that you mentioned you used to write books. When I was younger, I would write short stories, and I would do a draft, right? I would do a real quick draft, and then I would take it and I would write it really neat on notebook paper, staple it very cool, and then put a cover on my short story, and then, girl, I would rent it out to people.
You would rent it out.
I would rent out my stories. I would rent out my stories this is when I was in like 4th and 5th grade. I would rent my stories out.
So how much were you renting it for?
Look, don't try to knock my hustle, okay? Do
all
not
right,
try to knock my hustle.
I loved writing and like being a detective, but definitely nothing about science at all.
So how was growing up in Guyana? Did you see scientists? Did you know you would eventually get to a point where you would pursue your degree at Howard?
I think the thing is, growing up in Guyana, I've had science teachers. The school system is kind of different over here. So essentially, we go through kindergarten, which we call nursery school. And then we go to primary school, which America calls elementary school. And then when we're about, 12, we go straight into high school. So high school has like 5 forms, we call it. So it's similar to the British system because that's what our education system is modeled after. While I was in high school, I was pretty good at science. Like I would always ace those classes. And then when you reach to the 5th form, you're about 15, 16, you write something they call the Caribbean examination, where everyone in the Caribbean writes this exam and you have different subjects that you take. So before you get to that point, though, when you're in the 3rd form, you have to make a decision on what you want your career to, be focused on. So then they break it up into different streams. So then there's a science stream, there's the arts stream, there is agriculture, and I think I'm forgetting one. I think business. So if you want to go into business, you go into that stream, and that's what your classes are focused on. I decided to go into the science stream. Even coming back to the baby Rukia question, because I've always been interested in life. I think I made a post one time where I said I would literally get into trouble because I would always be in the yard and I would catch the frogs in the yard and kill them. And I would staple their little legs to the rocks. And I would literally take a little razor blade and cut. Oh, girls, a whole surgery going on in the yard. And I know there's probably animal cruelty. I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for this, but literally I would have all the damn frogs and I would open them up. And I'll be like, this is a little squishy. This might be the intestine, girl. My grandma would be yelling at me like, what are you doing? Why are all these dead frogs here? But I would go to the drain and catch the fish in the drain. Girl, that's life in the Caribbean. You're dirty, you're outside. It's the best life ever. I knew I was interested in how life worked or how the human body worked. So I went into the science stream. I know I had one teacher, Miss McDonald. She actually studied chemistry. So she got, I'm not sure if it's a PhD or master's, but she got a higher education degree in chemistry. Thinking about it now, I would maybe say she was the first scientist that I knew because she would teach us experiments, chemistry experiments in the classroom. After the 5th form, after I wrote the exam that everyone has to write in the Caribbean, there is another form they call 6th form. Essentially, you can take higher level classes. And I did the 1st form, again, focused on science. And then after that, my parents said, we do want you to go to university, but not the university in Guyana, because there's only one university there. So I had an aunt who actually went to Howard for her master's of physical therapy. And so that's kind of how I knew about Howard University, through my aunt. But when I applied, it wasn't with the intention of just going to Howard. I wrote the SATs in Guyana and I applied to a bunch of colleges here in America. But Howard University was the school that gave me a full ride scholarship to attend. So I was like, I'm going to Howard. And I think that was the best decision of my life because I don't think, I always say this, I don't think I would be the Rukia that I am if I didn't receive that kind of education from Howard. I probably wouldn't have embraced and loved my natural hair. I wouldn't have chopped all of my relaxed hair off, because being in that environment and embracing and loving your Blackness was just so refreshing for me. And I think I appreciate the education that I got there, not just science, but everything about Black culture I learned from there. And yeah, that's essentially my journey from Guyana to Howard.
So life with Rukia really has multiple meanings, huh? So like, yes, you're sharing your life, but you also have this passion for life. I love that.
I have an aunt who calls me like a Renaissance woman. She said, you can't, you're never just focused on one thing. You're always doing so many things or trying to put your foot in everything. But I think even with that, I had to try to find my niche in what I was passionate about. And I realized that a lot of times, especially when we take on certain positions, we feel like we have to conform to the mold of what that position might entail. So, for example, being a graduate student or being a scientist, there's a perception of what a scientist should be. You must always be a professional and you have to be proper because you're in academia. And I'm just like, well, I'm not. And that's not how I was raised. And I appreciate the upbringing my parents gave me because I was raised as an only child. I was grateful for my parents allowing me to fully express who I was as a child and never dulling whatever my interests were. I think even with, the whole Life of Rukia brand, I think it's just showing that even though I'm a graduate student, I'm a scientist, I'm so much more than that. And I have so much more interest and passion that I want other young Black women, especially Black girls in Guyana, to know that, hey, someone just like you can have all of this and continue climbing the ladder of success,
Everything about your brand is super inspirational, and we'll talk about that later on in the conversation. Did you know that when you were going into college that you would major in biology? Or was that something that evolved over the course of your bachelor's degree?
Well, no, I knew it had to be biology because even before I came to America, in order for me to get a visa to study, I had to tell them what I was coming to study. Like I said, from high school, being in the science stream and then taking higher level classes in science, I knew I did want to pursue biology. But, like you said, did I think I would be a scientist? No, because I never knew what exactly that was. Or even if I did, it was always the picture behind a textbook of 4 white men standing in a stairwell who were the authors who maybe would have written the textbook that I was studying. So in my mind, that was a scientist. And of course, I didn't relate that to my science teacher, but I definitely came into Howard knowing that I wanted to study biology to become a medical doctor. That was my goal initially.
Okay. And at what point did you realize that you would no longer pursue medical school?
So when I got to Howard my sophomore year, so I met with the dean because I wanted to get on campus employment, right? So I first met with the dean and I was like, because I didn't really know the ropes at the time, okay, you can go to the whatever office, the administrative office, and you apply to do student employment. So I went straight to him. I'm like, I need to sit with you. You need to help me. And then he sent me to the chairman of my department, Dr. Lee, who, I do credit for a lot of where I am today because, he met with me and he said, we have a science program where we put students to do research, but because you're not an American citizen, you might not qualify to be in my program. That was the LSAM program.
Mm-hmm. Can you say that again? It's the what program?
LSAM. It's basically a federally funded program to encourage minority students to get into sciences. So they pay undergrads to do research.
Okay.
A lot of schools have it, but it's called the Louis-Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. So it's an NSF-funded program, and they pay students to work in the lab to get research experience. So I wasn't eligible for that, but he told me, even though you might not be eligible, I still think it's important for you to start learning about science in a different way. So he encouraged me to join a research lab at the Howard Medical School. And then that lab focused on studying HIV infection in pediatric brain models. That's where I got my start. And I was like, this is some interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed doing the research. My PI, Dr. Mark Burke, he'd probably tell me I'd always come I'm like, do you have any work for me? Like, can you hurry up and give me these things so I can do the experiments? Like, I was always on him. He was like, thank you for keeping me in check. Like, I enjoyed that. And I think it was just a curiosity of wanting to know why anything worked the way it worked, and the excitement of getting results and getting a better understanding of whatever I was doing. So while I was in there, my junior year, I did a research summer program at Princeton. And, while I was there, I was studying herpes virus, its possible infection in the brain. Because I was doing research and I read somewhere that there were patients that had multiple sclerosis. There were a few cases where herpes virus was found in their brain. And I said, wow, like this could possibly change so much about what we know on how to treat diseases, because at the basic level, you need research to guide you and tell you what to do in the hospital or in the clinic. At that time, I was taking my MCAT. I was applying to medical school. And so I got back to Howard that fall, but I had this internal thing where I was like, I'm not really sure if I want to go to medical school, because I realized a lot of the medicine or medical practices that are done in the clinical setting are all guided by research. The researchers are the ones who basically tell the doctors what to do. They're the pharmacologists creating the drugs that the doctors prescribe. I had a huge internal battle because at that point I had submitted my primary applications. I had spent so much money and I was so scared to tell my dad, I want to change my mind, never mind. We paid almost like $3,000-$4,000 on like prep and medical school fees. It was such a hard struggle for me. During my summer program, I took the GRE prep course. It was offered free as part of the program. So I took it. I continued studying for the GRE. I was like, you know what, Rukia? You've got to be truthful. The most you can do is yell at me and I'll just put them on mute as he's yelling. I called both of my parents at the time and I told them, and they were like, okay. And I was like, wait, it was that easy? I was stressing so much. And my mom was like, whatever you want to do, I'm going to support you. Like, if that's what you want to do, then fine. That was around November, and applications to grad school were due December 1st, which is my birthday. So I was a little stressed. And I wasn't even that prepared for the GRE. I bombed the GRE. I didn't do the best that I knew I could do because I didn't prepare that well for that, especially because I was so stressed. But I withdrew my applications to medical school and I submitted applications to graduate school because I said, I want to be a scientist. I want to create knowledge. I want to learn why things work.
So, yeah, how was that choosing which PhD programs to apply to?
Well, I guess the one thing that guided me, I mean, it's not the best because everything was so last minute, was the ones that I probably didn't have to pay an application fee that would give me a free fee waiver at that point. Yeah. So I applied to a few, but I also looked at programs that had an umbrella program. At that point, I didn't even know specifically what I wanted to study. Well, even though I was at Harvard studying or doing neuro research, of course, I kind of guided my essays towards neuro-related stuff. Like, yeah, I want to study neuroscience, but at the back of my head, I was like, there's so many things to study. That's what I wrote for my applications. Mm-hmm. I chose a few of the schools that I also remembered from when I went to Abercrombs, that huge Black research thing for undergrads.
Which I am so jealous because I want to go to one and it looks like it's canceled for 2020.
Yeah.
And I was like, 2020 is my year. And joke's on me.
Right, girl. Let's not even talk about 2020. So I remembered a few schools, like the booths I visited when I went there. One of them was Rutgers. I remember meeting this professor, Dr. Langer, and he had given me a card for a fee waiver. And I remember looking at the program and him explaining they have this umbrella program where you come in, but you don't go directly into a specific concentration. They give you a year to figure it out. So I kind of looked for other programs similar to that. And that's a few of the schools that I applied to. For some reason, Rutgers stuck out to me. And it's funny because I have a picture in my phone from Abercrombs where, they do that thing where I would take a picture with this Instagram box around your face and you can win a $50 Amazon gift card, whatever. So I took one of that and he actually took it for me. And it's so full circle because now he's my first year academic advisor. And he literally called me Tuesday to have a discussion about, police brutality. So I was like, it's so funny that in 2017, you probably never thought that I would see you again.
Right.
So...
Yeah. And so you ended up at Rutgers, but how did you end up truly choosing that as your PhD program?
I think I chose here because one of the umbrella programs is essentially you come into the molecular biosciences. Under the molecular biosciences umbrella are concentrations for biochemistry, pharmacology, genetics, and something. There are 5 of them. I'm blanking right now.
It's okay.
But it's 5 different subheadings that you can choose from. But they don't throw you into all of those your first year. Your first year, you take classes that are centered around all of them, and then you do lab rotations, whichever department that falls under those headings. And then at the end of your first year, you decide, okay, well, I enjoy doing pharmacology. I'm going to join the pharmacology program. Or I want to study more about physiology, so you choose a physiology program, or you choose the biochemistry program. So they give you a lot of wiggle room or space to decide what you want to focus on specifically, instead of going to a program and going directly into a department that you might not enjoy as much as you thought. Also, I liked how big the school was and how many options I have because, I was given offers for Ivy Leagues, but some of the departments were so small to me. Even from my experience being at one for the summer, I was like, I don't really enjoy being here.
And is one of the issues that you didn't see yourself represented in the programs?
Oh, yeah. Technically, even here now, there are not a lot of Black PhD students, but I felt that there was more support for Black students here at Rutgers than I saw at other schools.
Okay, nice. And just while we're on this topic, so right now, if you're listening, we are, just post protest. Black Lives Matter is really taking a step forward. A lot of cities are burnt down right now. And I would love to know, how did your university respond to what has gone on over the past few days?
So it's funny you asked me that. At first, I think the president of the university sent out the generic support message statement, and then the chancellor did. So the program which my advisor, Dr. Langer, I mentioned before, is a part of, is called the IMSD, which I don't remember what those things stand for, but essentially it's another program funded to encourage diversity and paying minorities to do research. On Tuesday, they decided to have a Zoom meeting, which they call, a safe space for those of us who were affected to just come and vent. A few of them are white. What I appreciated was that those in charge who were white decided that they would be silent. He said, we're just going to be here to listen. We don't have any input. We don't know how you're feeling because we are not in your shoes. But they decided to have the meeting so that they can listen to us and have us vent about our feelings, about everything that was going on. So, one, I truly did appreciate that. I guess to listen to our perspective and thoughts, even though, it's emotional labor, which I called out in the meeting. I said, the burden of proof shouldn't fall on Black people to then tell you how to act because our burdens are already so heavy. I said, but I did appreciate the space for us to say how we were feeling about what was happening. Other students also voiced their concerns. However, I noticed that specifically my graduate program didn't send out a statement in support of its Black graduate students. But even though this is a separate entity where this IMSD program does fall under the graduate school and they do support minorities, I would have liked for the graduate school itself to have a statement out saying we support our graduate students. So what did Rukia do? I had a meeting yesterday with the dean on Zoom, and I told them how I felt. Mm-hmm. She acknowledged that everything going on, it's kind of like her not knowing what to say for fear of maybe saying the wrong thing or not doing the right thing. But I said, all in all, I think it's important that you stand and support the students. And there are students that would like to know that the graduate program is behind and is supporting us. Because there could be graduate students, which I know are attending protests. What if one of them gets locked up unlawfully? Are you going to support your students in that way? So I had a lot to say, and I appreciated that they were receptive of what I said. I haven't seen a statement yet, but I know they're probably working on one. Mm-hmm. I have professors who are calling me, even outside of the graduate program, to make sure that I'm fine, to see how I'm doing. Yeah, I was appreciative that there were individuals, even, I guess, from the administrative level. There's always politics involved with that. But individuals reaching out to us to make sure that we're okay. Even this afternoon, I have another white professor calling me to make sure that I'm okay and to maybe just talk and learn. Mm-hmm. So I am appreciative of that. And I can say I don't know if I was at another school, if maybe I would have seen this kind of support.
I can tell you that if you were at Purdue, you would not. So that's all I can say about that. So how was it moving from Washington, D.C. to New Jersey?
Girl, a culture shock, because I was like, where are the Black people? I remember because even moving I moved like a month to settle in to my apartment and stuff. And I remember, so my first year I moved here, I didn't have a car. Because living in D.C., the metro is everywhere. I don't need a car to move around. When I first moved here, I took the bus and I'm on the school bus and I'm like, damn, I don't see no other Black person on the school bus. Like, where are the Black students, So I think that way it was kind of like, because it's strange for me because I came from Guyana straight to another community where I saw people like myself, and now I'm moving to somewhere where it's not as prominent, So it was a little mental adjusting that I had to do in terms of asserting myself in a certain way that, okay, maybe you might be the only one or a few, learning how to exist in this space. Also, what I would say to my advisor, I voiced my concern about that to him. He's such a sweet old man. He was like, I don't really know how to say this without offending you, but I know of other Black students that I can put you in contact with so you can have friends. I was like, that's totally fine. So now I'm a part of a community of like other Black graduate students who are not just in the sciences program, but sociology, arts, whatever. And I have a few other close Black friends. We aren't the majority, obviously, but there are a few of us. So I've learned to create a community with them. And, I went on a walk with them yesterday, or I think Tuesday afternoon, because we needed a walk and we spoke about everything that was happening. So it took me like a year in to find that community, but it wasn't adjusting. And it's boring here in New Brunswick. I'm just like, there's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. It's not as popping as DC is.
I wouldn't know what the feeling of community was at Howard than to move to having a smaller community, but a community, because I went from a PWI to a PWI. And so there was no culture shock. The culture shock for me went from high school to college. So for you, I could not imagine like growing up in Guyana, going to this Black university, and then saying, okay, I'm going to go pursue this Ph.D. And now you have to deal with not only the challenges that come with pursuing a Ph.D., but also learning this new culture and how to interact in this new environment, which in itself can be a challenge because it's so unfamiliar to you. And sometimes we neglect to give ourselves credit for having to, on top of learn science, having to learn a whole new culture.
Yeah, even like where I live now, my apartment building, I can't say I've ever seen another Black person. I remember my dad, so he comes to visit me, and we were going down in the elevator, and we were leaving, and he saw this Black guy. He's like, Rukia, look, there's another Black person here. And I said, he's actually a delivery person. He doesn't actually live here, but it's just to say, it's like, I'm the only one. Or if I have friends coming to visit, they're like, we never see any Black person ever in the hallway, ever, So it's like, even here, it's strange. I think it's important to understand that maybe this is how the world is. And like, there are going to be spaces where you might be the singular representation of who you are, And I think it's taught me to be more assertive, speaking out about things and not being afraid of how it's received. I think I've had to become a borderline narcissist where I have to say what's on my mind and not care about the opinions of others, because a lot of times if you're the only one, you're kind of afraid to speak up, of how you're going to be judged, or maybe because you don't have another support behind you. And I'm like, I'm going to say what I have to say, and you can take it or leave it.
I was just thinking about that actually, because we had a meeting with STEM Noir, a Wellness Wednesday last night, and we had an ally come. It was a white woman, and she was the only white woman in the room. And we also had another ally. She was the only Latina woman in the room. And I am confident that the Latina woman has been the only Latina woman in the room. But I was very interested in knowing how was it for her to be the only white person in the room, and seeing when that dynamic changes, how it feels you almost feel closed in and small. And the challenge is coming in a room and not feeling like you're being small. And you're just like, you know what? No, let me stretch and breathe and be me and come out and do that. So, I thought about that yesterday. Like, how many times have I been the only Black person in the room? And I just felt so small.
It's like you're just so used to living this way and being kind of boxed in or always on edge. It's like, it's not normal. It shouldn't be normal, because these are things that we have to think about all the time, whereas our white counterparts don't. It's not a struggle for them. It's not ever a thought that they might walk into a room or feel smaller than, and even to the point that you made about pointing out just being in the room. Part of my conversation yesterday with the dean, she asked me if I looked at the space shuttle X thing going up to the moon, wherever they went to space. I said, no, I didn't look at it because science was just not my interest within the last week. Like, I was just disinterested in anything going on in the science world. And, she said, well, she did watch it. And she had to check herself because she made a comment to say, wow, there's so many Black people in the controlling room doing this. And she said, she shouldn't have to notice that to say, wow, look at all these Black people here. It should be something that's normal, because she's so used to events like this where they're only white people. And for her to actually point out to say, oh, wow, I'm impressed. There's so many Black people, shouldn't be something that she should ever have to say. It should just be the norm, you know?
Yep, exactly. You make it into your PhD program. And you have to pick a PI. You have to pick a primary investigator. What is that process like for you? And how did you end up choosing
my PI? So, like I said, the program is an umbrella program where you come in your first year into the molecular biosciences program, and then you do 3 lab rotations around 9 or 8 weeks in different labs. So they provide you with a list of advisors who have space. They give you that list to choose from. So you read and you see, okay, I'm interested in this research, so maybe I'll do a lab rotation there. I think stepping back a little, I did neuro research in undergrad. In 2018, I decided that I wanted to do cancer research because that was close to home for me. Coming into this program, I was also very impressed that they had a cancer center, which is the Rutgers or the New Jersey Cancer Institute. And, there are a lot of labs there. So they do have a very big cancer program here, which is one of the other reasons I chose to come here. I looked at different advisors and PIs who did cancer research or studied areas that I was interested in, and I reached out to them. In terms of rotation, I think I had a set list of things I was looking for. And one thing I decided when I was going to do my PhD, reading from the experiences of others, I said, I am not going to be that graduate student that burns out. And I am not going to be that grad student whose life is all about grad school. And I knew that maybe I would be labeled as lazy, unproductive, or maybe not the best graduate student. But I'm like, my life is going to have balance, and I'm going to prioritize other things outside of graduate school. When I came and I was looking at labs and doing rotations, there were some PIs who expected my whole life to be about grad school. When I met with them, I always ask, what are your expectations of me as a graduate student in the lab? I had one say to me that, well, at this point, your life should be about grad school. You might have other interests, but I expect you to make lab work your first priority. And I was like, nope, I'm not staying here. So I think knowing what you want out of the program and your expectations, you should ask those questions. So the program lets you do 3 rotations, talking about people of color. Not all people of color are Black allies. I was in environments where there were other people of color in the lab, but I was the only Black person, and I felt stereotyped and discriminated against. Even though I loved the research, I said, I'm not staying here. I'm not going to subject myself to discomfort and walking on eggshells for the next 4 or 5 years just because I love a research topic. Like, my mental health is important. I ended up not choosing that lab too. So I guess sometimes I feel like, hey, you should dial down your expectations. You have too many. But I was like, nope. At the end of the 3rd rotation, I had classmates who were going into labs, and there was me. I hadn't chosen any because I didn't like them. I was allowed to do a 4th rotation, and I was very careful in choosing that because obviously that's my last chance. I met with my current advisor. I looked up his research online. It was pretty interesting to me. I went and I met with the lab members. And, even though I was, again, the only Black person, I met with one graduate student and I had a conversation with him. He also rotated in one of the labs that I did before, and he ended up in this lab. And we had a conversation about, the expectations of that PI, telling me about his experience with my current advisor, Dr. Ganesan. He said he's one of the most brilliant men you'll ever meet, but at the same time, he brings himself down to your level. He never makes you feel like you don't know anything. My advisor is very accomplished, and he's always traveling. To that extent, he's never in the lab. He's not a hands-on PI. So I had to make the decision of thinking, can I exist in a space where the PI isn't there all the time? You know, because some people, they need their PI to be there. They want that constant guidance. I decided to rotate in the lab because, you know, from conversations with the advisor and then people in the lab, I realized that I could still get guidance from those in the lab. So there's a position called research teaching specialist, which is the level above a postdoc where you're hired to stay in the lab and do research. But at any time you can leave and maybe become a PI yourself or have your own lab. The lab that I'm in currently has 3, and I work under one of them. And during the rotation, I got a lot of guidance from him. And what I appreciated was that they were so patient with me. I was still learning because, you know, my background was not in cancer, but they were so patient in teaching me. If I messed up, it wasn't a big deal. It's a learning environment. Around the end of that rotation, when I had to make a decision, was when, you know, personally, my life turned upside down. At that point, my mom got sick. I was like, also, I was taking my first year qualifying exam, or I was preparing to take my first year qualifying exam. That was around June. So one, I asked my PI if I can have the 2 weeks off to prepare because it's pretty intensive. They give you 5 research papers and it's from different areas, and you literally have to study all of the papers, and you're tested on anything, literally anything. Why did they use this reagent compared to that reagent? So you have to study this paper inside out in order to pass. So I asked him for the 2 weeks off, and he was like, yeah, sure. He's like, I can't take you as a grad student if you don't pass anyway. So yeah, take as much time as you need. And I think I appreciated hearing that. Girl, let's not even talk about that because I didn't even study. No, I was so depressed. Like during that time, I didn't study. And to this day, I can tell you, I do not know how I passed my qualifying exam. Literally, I kid you not, and I'm not lying. I read those papers the day before the exam.
Wow.
So it's 2 days. It's a Monday and a Tuesday. So, well, the Saturday and Sunday, I read the 3 papers. I was going to be tested on the Monday. And literally the Monday, after the 6 hours I was in the exam, I went home and I read the remaining 2 for the Tuesday. Girl, I didn't expect to pass. I'll say that. I didn't expect to pass. I'm the kind of person also where I'm extremely private. So if I'm dealing with something, sometimes I don't share that. So I didn't really share with anyone that I was dealing with the fact that my mom was very sick and that I might have to leave immediately after the exam to go and see her. In any case, I'm going to do the best that I can. So after the exams, I told my PI. I think because my PI is also a medical doctor. He's a medical oncologist. He understands. So he said, go and take all the time that you need. And in that moment, I was like, so can I join your lab? He's like, yeah, I'll take you. You know, I appreciated that he cared about life outside the lab. You know, it's just not about getting his research done, but caring about my well-being to say, take as much time as you need and you're still going to be paid was all I needed to know, that I was going to be in a supportive environment. So that was my process of choosing a lab.
Yeah, and we're kind of getting into a space where you're opening up about the challenges that you face. One of them being that your mom got sick. So how did that translate into the progression of your PhD journey?
I guess, from 2018 is when she had her recurrence of metastatic breast cancer. even at that point, I didn't even know if I could graduate from Howard. That was my last semester. And of course, it was a hard semester for me. But I credit being able to make it through to my very close best friends who were always there. One of them even moved into my room to make sure I was okay. So even from then, I kind of knew at that point, okay, cancer is this huge disease. In that moment, having not studied it, just like every other person, I'm like, why on earth have we not found a cure for cancer? Like, what the hell is going on? So I think that's kind of what guided me into going into this field to study it. And then I met with a doctor. His name is LaFollesol. He's like an amazing scientist from Howard. He's very accomplished. I met with him to discuss, possible treatment options for my mom at that stage. He had the conversation with me and he said, unfortunately, we don't have any treatment for metastatic breast cancer. That was kind of course, it's defeating to hear. And then, we also started to talk about myself and what I was doing. I told him about my change from medical school to research. And he said, you know what? That's a good thing. He said, I'm a medical doctor, yeah, but I can't apply any new treatment or anything to my patients because we need the research to be done first. And he said, that's why we need you to help us get to that point. So I think, hearing that from him was, I think, all I needed to know that I was making the right decision in choosing what I wanted to study. That kind of guided me to choosing, the research labs that I did. And then even with the lab that I'm in now, what I appreciate about being there is that the work that I'm doing is directly translational. I work with real cancer patient samples. Whatever I'm doing at some point is going to probably end up in a clinical trial for some type of cancer, breast cancer. Especially being personally affected, it was more of me being here for revenge. Everybody has their why of why they study what they study, and mine is revenge. Literally, that's it.
That's a very interesting adjective that you're using. Would you mind elaborating more on what you mean by for revenge?
I mean, I usually don't like to make this analogy, but I said, think about going into work every day and working with the thing or person that killed your parent. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to just sit back and be friends with it or treat it lightly? Or are you going to try your best to figure out what is going on and get rid of it?
Right.
So every day I go into lab, or if I'm studying, or even now, it's all about revenge. It's all about getting back at cancer and ending it, essentially, for me.
Okay. Yeah. I thank you for sharing that analogy. So along this same lines, can you share with us a little bit about what your current research is?
Currently, so my first year, I was in different little side projects trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But currently, I'm focused on triple negative breast cancer. There are different types of cancer or breast cancer. We have those that we call ER positive or PR positive, where estrogen and progesterone are the hormones that are driving that breast cancer. So you do have therapies that would target the hormone to maybe slow down the progression or stop it. Then you have another type called the human epidermal growth factor, or HER2, which is a growth receptor that drives another type of breast cancer. So you have therapies that are now targeting the HER2 receptor to slow or end the progression of that type of breast cancer. Now, with triple negative breast cancer, it essentially tells you what it's not. It's not ER, or it's not estrogen, it's not progesterone, and it's not HER2. And we don't know what it is. We don't know what's driving it. And because of that, that has one of the lowest prognosis outcomes. It's one of the deadliest ones because there's no targeted therapy for it. my project essentially is to figure out what are the drivers in this type of cancer. So I have models where I do genomic analysis and sequencing of patient samples with the hope of finding genomic alterations in their DNA, comparing it to other types of cancers or comparing it to a normal person. I guess in the easiest way I can explain it, what the differences are and what the similarities are, and do I see any common mutations among them that can just signal to us and say, in triple negative breast cancer, this is the driver, and this is what we can target.
Mm-hmm. I know that this is constantly evolving and it's going to change as time unravels itself, but what are your current aspirations as a scientist?
I know for a fact that I do not want to go into academia. And I say that with a heavy heart because I think representation in academia is important.
Oh my goodness.
But I think of the burden that I might have to carry, or the burden that I hear other Black women say that they carry being in academia. And so I know for a fact that I don't want to become a professor. I had a conversation with one of my close professors she's kind of my friend because I'm happy that I have people I can talk to anyway and they don't take offense or anything. But, I've had a lot of conversations with her, and she told me one time, she said, I don't think you belong in a lab holding a pipette. I think you belong on Capitol Hill changing policy, because you're so bold in the things that you want to happen and the change that you want to see. I think you can bring about a lot of the changes that we need in terms of how we conduct research and how research is funded, and especially, with cancer too. When she said that, she's like, policy over pipettes. She's like, we have enough people in the lab holding a pipette doing the research. So I think with that in mind, I'm kind of leaning in that area, especially since I'm also an avid volunteer with the Susan G. Komen organization. It's one of the biggest breast cancer foundations in the world. I'm kind of leaning in the avenue of learning how they are able, to fund research. There's so many policies in terms of just the basic access to therapies, because I sit and I think of how with my mom, there were probably possible therapies that we could not afford. And I'm like, why is cancer treatment so expensive that the rich live and the poor die? And I think, accessibility is one of the things that I'm trying to fight for, in terms that everybody deserves a fair shot of being able to afford life-changing therapies. I think it's an uphill battle that I fight every day, because even at one point, I'm like, I do want to go into pharmacy. With my research currently, I have the potential that if I do figure out something, then I'm able to then possibly create the targeted therapy for whatever I find. And that would lead me into industry. So I don't know, ask me in the next maybe 3-5 years.
Yeah, and that's what I say, it's constantly going to be evolving. And that's why I say, I'm not holding you to it,
But I think even currently, I'm not waiting to get there to do that. I think I'm privileged enough to be in a space where even as a student, I can make small steps in trying to, one, change policy, or two, working towards a therapy. So I'm not waiting. I am not the kind of person that sets long-term goals. I mean, obviously there are things I want to accomplish, but I'm more of a short-term goal setter, where every day I'm going to work towards something that I want to accomplish for today. If that makes sense.
It does.
I don't know.
It does.
Yeah.
That's as much as you can do. You started a brand called Life with Rukia. What was the inspiration?
I decided to do this even before I got to graduate school. I was at Howard. I was looking up the website for the different schools I was applying to, looking at their current students, and I was like, why am I not seeing any Black person? Or why is it that science looks so white? I thought to myself, and I said, even while I was at Howard, I would get messages from, young girls back in Guyana who would ask me how they can get to where I am with, even if they don't even want to go into science specifically, how can they pursue, a higher education in America coming from there? So that was something that I was always, working and helping young women with. And I said, the fact that they see me means that they know it's possible. Because if you don't see something, then how do you know it's possible to be that something? Mm-hmm. So, with that in mind, I decided that I wanted to make it broader, especially because, from my interviewing experiences and being sometimes the only Black person interviewing with a group of other non-Black students, I said it's important that I share my experiences, however good or bad that might be. And I thought of the perception of what a scientist might be, because even to my family, a lot of them don't even understand to this day what I do, in terms of they don't know it's a profession. Or if they think of a scientist, they might think of a crazy physics, something they see on the TV with an old white man in a coat with balding hair with his goggles on, like that, like a crazy mad scientist. That is the picture that so many people have. And that's the picture I had. And then I was like, wait, so anybody could be a scientist? Like, even me, So I wanted to create a brand that not only showcased my life as a scientist, but to say, well, hey, we have normal lives too. I have so many other interests. I might not fit into this status quo of the image that is constantly perpetuated. I love traveling. I love cooking. I love doing so many other things. I love going to brunch. Like DC's brunch culture, I picked that up there. There's so many things that I love doing. And I think it's important that other young Black students who might be even in high school or undergrad know that, hey, this is an actual attainable profession that I can work towards, and that I can have an interest in science and also have an interest in so many other things.
That's beautiful. I think a challenge that I faced too when I was starting to research her was this feeling of, well, I don't want to kind of put myself in the corner and say, I only want to talk about this like one part of my life. So what I decided was the research her has so many different dynamics where on my podcast, we're talking about research, we're talking about research hers. And then we have the social media aspect where you're going to get what you get. You're going to get what I'm giving you on my social media. And that's just how I translated exactly what you're saying, where you're going to get all these different dynamics of who I am. But for me, the podcast, I try to stay very focused. And then for my Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, kind of, but Facebook isn't really my favorite. I'm like, and now I'm starting to jump into TikTok a little bit and understand, like, how do I do TikTok, and with that, this is all to say, like, on those different social media platforms, I'm going to use those to be my full Black ass self. And then
take it or leave it.
And then the podcast is more so you're coming here as a resource, as a way of hearing voices that sound like you, and as just a way of understanding different means of progressing as a PhD student and inspiration sometimes. So, everything is not like, researchers. Sometimes I post like, okay, I love myself and these are the reasons why I love myself,
Like, you're going to see me on the beach in a bikini, sunbathe, and then you're going to take it because guess what? Humans like to sunbathe, so get used to it.
And if you don't like it, you don't have to follow it.
You can leave. Exactly. You got options. Man, don't even get me started on that.
Yes, because sometimes when you start a quote unquote like brand, you are expected to do one thing, and I'm not that one thing type of person. So there's that.
That's kind of why I said, like, my brand is my life. Like, that's who I am. Like, I'm not just one person. So
thank you so much for being on the show, girl. Like,
thank you for
are amazing. Me. Please never forget it. Like,
don't make me blush.
Again, we just got greatness all over this show. It's just dripping. If you want to connect with Rukia, you can go to her website at lifewithrukia.com. She is also on the Instagram at lifewithrukia. All of that information, any other contact will be in the show notes. You can connect with me at The Research Her on the socials and also at theresearchher.com. And until next time.